Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss how Brexit harms have slowly continued to crawl out from underneath the rocks it was hiding behind, as a cabinet minister now acknowledges that Brexit has hit investment in the UK. As I said at the weekend, we really do have a seismic shift in the Brexit debate again, and it may not be more than a couple of years before this nonsense of divergent Brexit has been dropped from all mainstream debates. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So it's turning out to be a huge week for Brexit. It's a bit like in the old days, 2019, Brexit, and a little bit more Brexit. And, you know, I thought it would be a big week this weekend. I'm going to be doing a few videos where I discuss my thoughts on various related issues that are not necessarily of the time, but I think I'm getting quite excited. So let's evaluate where we've come since the hard Brexit hit and what the direction of travel is now. So in 2021, the first year outside the single market and customs union, consequences abounded, but the government attempted to hide the ill effects behind other issues. You know, or they would blame the EU for being uncooperative, or they would just downright deny the damage that was being done. Now, this continued for a while last year as well, but then things changed massively when Liz Truss was let loose. Within just a few weeks, it seemed no longer possible to hide the damage of Brexit, and even the BBC started talking more frankly about Brexit harms. They still muddy the waters to an extent, but consider that previously they'd been actively editing out all complaints about Brexit when interviewing impacted business owners up to that point. Whenever they discussed the state of the economy, they'd sometimes allude to Brexit. Maybe they'd sort of mention labour shortages, but they would never explicitly state that this was down to Brexit or down to the hard Brexit. Any mention of the harm being done by Brexit was left to be read between the lines to those in the know. But now it's different. It's still a work in progress, but it is much more out in the open. More explicitly, pro-Brexit media is also having to acknowledge the damage being done, even if they still try to argue there are ways to rescue it, or that it's all the fault of those pesky Remainers who were unable to stop us leaving the EU, but were still somehow able to decide what sort of Brexit we got, and for some unfathomable reason, we chose the second hardest one imaginable. But we also had a little crack in the government. As the lettuce stood triumphant over the shattered political remains of Liz Truss, a few weeks later, Jeremy Hunt was reported to have been talking up the benefits of a Swiss-style Brexit arrangement for the UK. Now, when asked, Hunt said it has never been part of the government's plan to pursue this, but he also refused to deny that the Treasury had been discussing it. The hardline Eurosceptics in the party were incensed. Jeremy Hunt was, of course, a Remainer. And if Brexit had to happen, he was never a supporter of the hard Brexit. Except, of course, during the 2019 general election campaign, when he had to in order to be selected as a Tory candidate. But everyone knows Hunt would like to soften Brexit, and now he's the Chancellor, the second most senior member of the government. But Rishi Sunak's a Brexiteer, though. He campaigned for leave without any career-based motivations, unlike Boris Johnson. You know, he actually wanted us to leave the EU. But Sunak has not been given the impression he's a hard Brexiteer. In all likelihood, he just wanted to deregulate the financial sector without losing too many other ties with Europe. And when news emerged of the meeting last week to discuss ways to work more closely with the EU, remember the meeting wasn't about, okay, Brexit's not going well, how can we recapture this? But it was the divergent approach is dead. How do we work closer with the EU? And now the news that the government may not be far away from announcing a final settlement on the implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol. Hard Brexiteers in the media are on red alert. I've not seen a great deal of reporting on what senior members of the ERG have to say all about this, unless I'm missing something, which is possible. They seem to be keeping their cards very close to their chest at the moment. But now we've had a cabinet minister, Mel Stride, say that Brexit has created trade friction and hit investment. He still insists, of course, as the government in general do, that Brexit has brought major opportunities, without saying what they are. There's no suggestion that they want to reverse Brexit as such. They're not even slowly moving towards this idea of a Swiss-style arrangement. They're not even suggesting it's something to be considered. But it is another step along the path. If we think about the steps towards rejoining the EU, you can break it down into 5 main stages, and probably in this order. First, settled public opinion that we should abandon the hard Brexit at least. Second, mainstream politics adopting the same position. This will happen seamlessly. Third, negotiating a customs union that is, it's totally bespoke for the UK, absolutely unique, world beating, really, but on close inspection, basically the same as the one we had. Fourth, renegotiating re-entry into the single market. And finally, applying to rejoin the EU. But within each of these stages, there are incremental steps, and some of them can cross over each other. The key voters are not yet ready to abandon Brexit, no matter what some people fervently want to be the case. This is why a Labour leadership comprised of committed Remainers is sounding so stubborn when it comes to how far they're prepared to reverse Brexit. But like I keep saying, before we can make any of the big steps towards rejoining anything, we need to repair relations, renegotiate the trade and cooperation agreement. That is the EU's main focus. Recently, David Lammy was emphasising the fact that Labour's policy for renegotiating the trade and cooperation agreement with much closer alignment, as well as a security deal, was for their first term. He emphasised that this is for our first term. Anything they say now, no matter how long term it sounds, is for their first term only. The manifesto for the next election isn't written yet. They've got a work in progress. But the one for the one after, not even touched. And not only should that be obvious without them having to say anything, but as I say, one of the senior members of the Labour leadership team has said as much a few weeks ago in public. The Brexit policies in the manifesto after, completely unwritten, and assuming public opinion continues to move on, and I think you'd have to be a special sort of deluded to think it won't, the 2028 election, if that's when it is, will be much more conventionally clear about our Brexit direction of travel, and it will be much further towards the EU. For people who get bored of the details, it'll be much more clear. And the reason for that is the people who are bored of the details will want to see it. The Conservatives will have moved on at this point as well, because that's also essential. The problem with even trying to rejoin the single market, say, is there's no formal process for doing it without an application to join the EU. Now, obviously, there are several countries in Europe that are members of the single market with no interest in joining the EU at all. So, of course, it's possible to negotiate entry, but there's no system for doing so. It's like negotiating any form of trade agreement. It's not a straightforward process. It will take a long time. The EU have been reasonably clear. They can't be asked negotiating anything like that with a Labour government, only for the Tories to win an election and sink the whole thing. Waste of their time. But the good news is that it is essentially the same voters who swing elections each time. It's mostly the same few 100,000 people who consistently vote in marginal constituencies, but who do not consistently vote for any particular party. They'll vote Labour one year, they'll vote Conservative the next. When this group of voters decides that Brexit is a load of bollocks, the political conversation will shift again. Consider that the Tories' position on Brexit is not really very different from the one Labour have been having for 2 years now. It's just they're a lot cagier about it because there's factions within their party going, don't you be cheeky now. Whereas Labour have got no such hang-ups. The Lexiteers are gone. And this isn't a surprise that it should now be fairly similar. Both parties should have similar positions on Brexit because it's not a party political issue. It was never a party political issue before the referendum, and it shouldn't be one now. The position should reflect that of their target voters, and it's basically the same voters. Yes, Tories also compete with the Lib Dems and the SNP in some seats, so there's a slightly different emphasis there. But that pales into insignificance compared to the number of marginal seats they're fighting over against Labour. The only reason it's taken the Tories this long to get to this point is because of those factions within their party that have been preventing them tilting towards important voters. And they still are. That's why I keep saying Rishi Sunak's 5-point plan doesn't address anything that would appeal to voters. It's all there to appeal to these factions. But the current government have obviously decided that the whole divergent hard Brexit for the sake of a divergent hard Brexit has worn thin. Consider, this change of direction isn't just because Hunt and Sunak are at the top of government now. They're not kings. No ruler rules without consent, and a democratic leader, they sort of are, much less so. They couldn't get away with this if they didn't have strong support amongst other Tory MPs. But once they lose power, they will have no choice but to start paying attention to voters if they want to get back into government. Like, I predict, let's say the Tories, after losing the next election, elect someone who is ideological but not pragmatic. And I think that's definitely on the cards. Please be Jacob Rees-Mogg. That new leader will not last the full Parliament. It'll be Ian Duncan Smith all over again. Guarantee it. Look at where we are. 25 months after leaving the single market and customs union. That's all it's been, 25 months. And a senior member of the hard Brexit Tory government is openly saying in an interview in public that Brexit has damaged the economy. They will still try to argue about how much, and they will still try to argue that there are net benefits to be had from Brexit, but they're no longer denying the harm. It's very unpredictable, but some think the next election is probably 20 months again. Look where we've come in 25 months. Think about where we'll be in another 20 months. Then in 2025, whoever's in government will have to renegotiate many of the terms in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. If, as seems likely, it's Labour, it's clearly going to include a much closer trading arrangement. They've said as much. They'll also negotiate a security deal, something the EU are very keen on. See, the Tories kept banging on about leverage in negotiations with the EU, but they never actually applied any. It was all rubbish. Labour answer blinkered. On security grounds, we have much that the EU would like to agree. And there is much that we would like to agree on trade. Nobody's talking about ridiculous concessions on cherry-picked trade arrangements. But we will find ourselves by the end of 2026 with a much closer relationship with the EU. And we can kick off from there, because then we'll be looking ahead at the following manifesto. I don't think people need to be as patient as might have previously been thought. I think we're stuck continuing to watch the Tories tear themselves apart over Europe, like they always had, because they were stupid enough to think that Brexit would end those arguments. I think we're stuck with that until the next election. But I take heart from the fact the Tories may at least focus more on alignment. And even if they can't do that, at least stopping further divergence. The retained EU law bill is still a worry, but let's see how that pans out. But after 2019, the only hope was collapsing Tory party, which meant we knew we were going to have to wait a full 5 years. There was no way of getting rid of them sooner, or very little way. There is still a window for this year, but it's very unlikely. That has to be factored in. We had to accept in 2019 that if we were going to get rid of them as soon as possible, that as soon as possible was probably 5 years. But after that, I can see very rapid progress in both words and action. And I think that every incremental step in the right direction should be welcomed, not complained about because it's not enough. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.